Well, good afternoon, everyone, and really a wonderful thank you, and thank you for joining us at this joint INCSR, NCSR, and RBOC network webinar on a lifetime of resilience and flood engagement through every life stage. So just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch back later. So my name is Andrew MacLeod, and I'm a research fellow at the Alliance Manchester Business School, the University of Manchester. So as well as welcoming you to the webinar briefly, I'll also be moderating the question and answer session later. So you will have noted that your microphones and cameras are currently switched off, but you can contribute questions and comments via the chat and the Q&A function as we go along. At the end, we will have a generous period for a question and answer session. I'll ask questioners to raise their hands, and then we can individually enable people's microphones and cameras. So before I move on to today's agenda, I would just welcome all of you to let us know in the chat who you are, where you're from, and whether this is the first time that you've joined one of our webinars. I think you'll get a sense through that of the kind of the wonderful diversity of people that attend. The agenda for today's webinar is really straightforward. So I will conclude this brief introduction in the next minute or so. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers, all of whom will really provide a focus around cases related to the Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Programme. So it's really a fantastic opportunity, I think, for them to share their experience in relation to cases about how organisations are engaging communities in ways that recognise changing needs, roles and capacities over time. So it's really a wonderful opportunity for us to hear from them and to ask questions and for them to then share their experience of the various cases that they will focus on. So thanks to Roisin, my colleague, Roisin joining in the background, for letting everyone in and keeping an eye over the chat. But a special thanks then to Toby Jones. And Toby, you'll be coming in a moment or two, who will do the introductions to the speakers and the cases, etc. Before I pass over to Toby, however, just really to let you know about how to stay connected with the INCSR and the work of the NCSR. So webinar recordings will be available via the NCSR webpage. So hopefully either by the end of this week or early next week, the recording from today's webinar will be available via the webpage that you can see on the screen. Both the INCSR and the NCSR have LinkedIn pages, so please look us up and follow us if you're not doing so already. And then I'd also encourage you to check out the webpage of the RBOC network, who have been one of our key partners throughout the last number of years in our webinar series. So Toby, I will stop sharing and I will invite you to share your slides to then kick off the presentations.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you for having us.
That's fantastic. I can see that, Toby.
Fabulous. All right, I will crack on with them. So hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us across the UK and across the globe today. So my name is Toby Jones. I'm going to be introducing our panel today. I'm merely a compere for the main event, really. But by way of a very brief introduction, I work at JBA Consulting, which is a flood and coastal resilience and environment consultancy based in England. I'm based in Bristol myself. And I'm a flood resilience principal analyst and lead for emergency planning at JBA. I've been working on ResilienTogether, one of the projects we're going to talk about today, for the past 5 years as well. So I have a very vested interest in the topic we're talking about today. So we're talking about a lifetime of resilience. So the aim of the presentations and our panel discussion today is very much about kind of bringing forward the importance of tailoring our engagement to the life stages of the communities that we're aiming to connect with. We very often find ourselves in situations where we have communities who are vulnerable and we treat them as such and actually don't notice and kind of make best use of the varied skills, energy that you can gain from engaging with all different life stages. So how we want to share this kind of learning with you is through experiences from 3 flood innovation projects, talking about how they're achieving life stage engagement in different ways and the challenges and the opportunities that they've faced. So just mentioned briefly by Andrew there, the Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Programme, FCRIP, is a £150 million initiative that's funding 25 projects across England. They are funded by the government, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, in England, and overseen by the Environment Agency. They are basically projects that are testing innovative ways to manage escalating risk from flooding and coastal erosion. So really, it's kind of moving beyond that kind of hard engineering solutions. The program very much is focusing on nature-based solutions, technology-based monitoring and forecasting solutions, and community engagement solutions as well, which is where our focus lies today. So kind of finding innovative ways to engage with the public is central to these projects, and empowering individuals and communities to be ready for flooding is essential basically to building a more resilient nation. And that's really what we're trying to build towards kind of as a collective group of projects across the nation. So today we are very lucky to have 3 different representatives from 3 different innovation projects with us today. So we have Sharon Russell-Verma from ResilienTogether, Chris Knight from the FAIR project, and Tegan from BlueHeart. We'll be coming on to them just shortly. Before we get too far into it, just for a little bit of context for those who aren't aware of it, our headline stats are that 6.3 million properties across England are based in areas that are at risk of flooding from either seas, rivers, or surface or storm water. With climate change, these total numbers of properties are going to increase from rivers and seas, and surface water alone could increase to about 8 million by the middle of the century. Which will equate to about 1 in 4 properties. So what we're looking at is a national scale problem. So to help address this growing threat we have within communities, we have to build resilience across all stages of our lives. The simple idea behind this really is that often we kind of overlook tailor engagement for every life stage, and we want to be empowering and mobilizing people with their current capacities and strengths and keeping those in mind when we're engaging. This is termed life stage engagement. By way of example, children are acutely affected during and after floods. They can lose their homes, friendship networks, families, all the kind of familiar surroundings. But despite this, children actually can play a really active part in helping our communities during and after a flood event, and actually can reduce, and this can actually reduce long-term stress in the children themselves by doing so, by kind of giving them that kind of agency. They can be active citizens and take new flood preparedness skills home, and then teach their families how to stay safe as well, and kind of provide that intergenerational input as well. Young adults, then midlife stage people, are often the most time poor, but also have experienced the most pressure of care and responsibility as well. So to accommodate this, we need to meet these groups on the schedules that they actually work to, and place and be in the places that they're already present in. There's no point asking people with kids, a full-time job, and many other pressures on them to come and join us at a kind of session in an evening somewhere out in the sticks. We need to go to them at the places that they are themselves. We often also view later life stage only as vulnerable people. In the UK, for example, people between 65 and 75 are actually making up the highest proportion of our volunteers. So they're a powerhouse of energy and local history and willingness to kind of mobilize and make change happen. So by involving everybody, considering every single life stage that we're in, from those kind of active volunteers at the later life stage to the kind of adaptable young, we're hopefully aiming to empower every generation with the right tools. And then this kind of hopefully creates a generational cycle of knowledge sharing and support as well. That's a very brief introduction to kind of what we're talking about today, but really the meat of it is in how we're approaching that and how we're doing that through these kind of innovative ways of engaging. So each one of our panel members will talk a bit about kind of a focus on kind of early years, kind of starting at kind of preschool, kind of going up to school age, and then we'll talk a bit about kind of later life stage as well with Chris as well. Very much interested to hear everyone's thoughts as we go through, so please do use the chat, and we'll come to Q&A at the end as well, so you can hear more about kind of the challenges, approaches taken, and taking away learning from this as well. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand over to Sharon to talk to us about ResilienTogether. Oh, you're on mute, Sharon, as well.
Okay, so hopefully everybody can see this. Just waiting for it to come for me.
Yes, we can now. Perfect.
Thank you, Toby. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting ResilienTogether to talk today. My name is Sharon Russell-Verma, and I am the Flood Innovation Manager at Central Bedfordshire Council, but also the project manager of the ResilienTogether project. So today I'm going to talk about our educational hub at Standalone Farm. But first, just a little bit of a background for ResilienTogether. So our objective is to reduce flood risk to people and place, enhance the water environment in the Pixbrook catchment, and improve community resilience. So the Pixbrook catchment is a 16-kilometre squared catchment located about an hour north of London. And it's quite a small catchment, but it crosses two counties, Hertfordshire and Central Beds, and it suffers from two different types of flooding. We get surface water flooding or stormwater flooding in the south, in the top of the catchment in Letchworth, where it's more overrun, and then as we flow into the end of the catchment, it's more about rivers overflowing their banks. And the way that we've approached this particular project is to look at producing a smart catchment approach, which means that we've put a huge amount of sensors, which include things like river level sensors, flow sensors, water quality meters, rain gauges, and etc., to really better understand what happens when the rain falls and how the Pix catchment responds to that. However, today I want to really focus on the other element of what we're trying to achieve, and that is community resilience. So we have chosen Standalone Farm as our educational hub, and there's a whole load of hosts of reasons why we've done that. It is at the heart of the catchment. It gets 134,000 visitors a year. It's also a working farm, so that is what it was originally, and then it diversified to become much more educational. It's fantastic in that it's surrounded by beautiful green fields. It's got lots of nature, gardens, animals in there. It also has an existing play area, and the Pixbrook runs all the way through the farm, right from the beginning all the way to the end to the reservoir. And that picture on the top is actually a picture from Standalone Farm and shows the beautiful chalk stream. The second picture is an overview looking over the reservoir. So there's a whole lot of educational amenities that we can use as part of ResilienTogether and the offer that we have to really help people understand their flood risk. It's owned by Letchworth Heritage Foundation, and they own a lot of buildings within Letchworth. So we also have access to other buildings, which include an art gallery and cinema, which is part of our engagement as well. And the other thing, of course, is the longevity. So Standalone Farm has been around for more than 30 years, and lots of our project partners have said, oh, I remember coming here as a child. So there's that nostalgia bit as well. The farm is opened for children really from toddlers all the way till about 12 years old. So we're talking about little kids all the way up to kind of primary school age. And we've been working with Standalone Farm staff to really improve their offering in terms of educational and playing through learning. These are the features that we've already installed. So the first big thing is a water play. We have also got a projected augmented reality model, which is known as a PALM. We have an augmented sunback. So both of these are interactive tools. We have a level sensor, river level sensor within the farm, which looks like a turtle, or will do by the end of the project. We also use the reservoir viewing point. And one of the great things that we put in is Oscar the Otter's Riverside Ramble, which is a project that we've done in conjunction with Hello Lamppost. We've got lots of leaflets and maps, educational signs. And the other thing that we have in there is we're trialing an automated water sampler. So we've got some information around water quality. And we're working with the Letchworth Heritage Foundation team and Standalone Farm team to produce STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and maths learnings for the school children. A little bit about our objectives. We really wanted to develop an educational hub and public engagement resources at standalone farm for the reasons that we've mentioned above. We want to engage with the age range between 2 and 7, learning about the local water environment and flooding through really fun outdoor tactile play area. And then we want to engage with the older children, kind of 7 to 11 or 12, about more relevant topics to them, maybe bring a little bit more information in around climate change, flood risk, water quality, and really help improve the community resilience via the indoor educational hub and event space that we have, where we have the interactive learning resources, such as the Palm and the Sandbox. And I am going to touch on all of these. But first we have okay, so the first one is the water play zone. So we this was a vision that Letchworth Heritage Foundation and Standalone Farm already had, and we talked to them about it, and it aligned very much with what we wanted to do. This site was like an old site with some really old cars that were never used. They were actually not safe to use. So we took this site and we developed it into this water play zone. It's really fantastic. It's a hands-on learning through play. It's really tactile, very interactive, and it's got this whole series of pumps and dams and weirs and rills, which basically pump the water around these rills, and children get to play with them. I'm going to go to the next slide so you can see. So these are the kind of things that we have. So you've got the water pump. There's a couple of those within here. There's those sluice gates, and the children can decide which way the water goes around this whole area. So it works really well. And every time that we go down here, this is full of children playing. A little bit more information about it though. It uses main water because we needed that for the safety as children are going to be playing with it. But on the side, just up from where you can see that sign, there is a filter bed built into the construction of this, and that water is filtered into that and then runs straight into the picks. In addition to that, we also decided to make one of Oscar the Otter's Riverside Rambles points to be at the water play. There's lots of information boards, and we do have some new educational signs and some new other things like art rubbing posts that we want to install in this area as well. So it's still a work in progress. Let's move on. So the other interactive educational tool that we have is called Oscar the Otter's Riverside Ramble. And we've developed this in conjunction with Hello Lamppost and Bonfire. So Hello Lamppost is an organisation that has an AI platform that uses QR codes. And they've been used in other parts of the world, lots in train stations, and lots of local authorities use them and more now. But what we wanted to do was how they work basically is that you scan the QR code and there's some content in there. So we created the content suitable up to 9 years old. We have a series of quizzes around floods, sensors, the climate change, chalk stream, and the importance of blue-green spaces. So children scan the QR code, they ask a question, and then they're told whether they're right or not. And if they're wrong, then they get a little bit of an explanation why. But we wanted to make it a little bit more child friendly, because normally Hello Lampposts are on a plain poster with a QR code and one question. So we really wanted to make it much more fun for children. So this is how we came up with the cast of characters that we have. We used the creative agency Bonfire to help us with this, and we looked back to our ecological report. And so all of our characters, so Oscar the otter, Mabel the mayfly, Felix the fish, and Karim the kingfisher, they all are found in the River Picks catchment area. We do have 2 other in there. We have a duck because there's a duck pond, and we have an alpaca because they happen to be on the farm and they're very popular. So we added those in as well. So the other thing was that we just wanted to make it as easy as possible, so there's a map there so that everybody can see where they are on it. And we also want to make it exclusive, so that's why we were thinking about the things, the different names that we used. Hello Lampers tell us that it was one of the most successful launches in the UK, and they believe that was because of the additional creativity that we put in it, using the characters and the pictures that we have on there. And in addition to that, it's a really handy tool for us because there's a lot of metrics that come along with this, including, you know, the time of the day, the most popular questions, how many people got correct answers, how many people got wrong answers, and that can help us decide if we need to change some of those answers. So it's a really good feedback mechanism built into this tool. The other thing that we have on the farm is some sustainable urban drainage our sedge planters. So these are new additions to the farm. They went in at the end of the summer last year. Really, really successful as we put them in. In addition to obviously attenuating the water, and people can see how they work. We've got shady plants in one and sunny plants in the other, and we're going to have some signs that describe what the sedge planters do and why they're valuable. But there's also some hedgehog hotels in this in the side of that sedge planters that you can see, and also of course you've got the bug hotel as well. So it's a really great learning resource, and people love these. Our next one is our augmented reality sandbox. So this is some of our interactive tools. It's a visualization tool that shows you how topography affects the way that water moves across the catchment. So I'm going to go to the next slide to explain it a little bit in more detail. We created this simple version of how the augmented reality sandbox works for the children to be able to read. And we also decided that we would bring our cast of characters in to help them explain that. So Oscar tells us about how you shape the sand into making hills and mounds. And Mabel the Mayfly tells us about the contour lines that are there, and that the closer together they are, the higher the hill is, and the further apart, the lower they are, and the different colors as well. And what you do with the augmented sandbox is that you wave your hand above a projector, and then virtual rain falls. And as it falls, it then shows you how the water would move around those hills and valleys that have been made. This is such a fantastic tool. Everybody loves it, from 2-year-olds all the way up to 80-year-olds. So it's been really, really successful, and one of our most liked tools, I think, within Sandown Farm. The other tool that we have is called a PALM, which is a projected augmented relief model. This is a 3D model designed to help communicate flood risk for local communities, and we also use it for school education. It's a really great engagement tool that helps people visualize flood risk and the benefit of any flood alleviation schemes. It consists of a 3D printed scale model of the landscape and the Pixbrook in this particular place. It's based on LiDAR data, and then you have a projector that overlays information onto the model. And then you have flood maps that are projected onto the model that show areas that have been affected by flooding in the past, and any areas that might be affected during the future flood events. So there's a whole PowerPoint that people can run through as well, and learn some more information about flooding in their local area. And then lastly, I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about the river level sensors. So these are what we call the turtle. Don't think they quite look like a turtle yet, more a bit like a Star Wars thing, but by the end of the program, we're going to wrap them and make them look like a turtle. And these are fantastic. They show people the river level. We've got some information around those, and they're part of the Oscar the Otter quiz as well. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I just would like to say that today we found out that the Education Hub at ResilienTogether has been nominated and shortlisted for an award at the Flood and Coast Conference, which is a conference that takes place every year in the UK. But thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, great to hear about the finalist for the award as well. All right, I'm going to rapidly move us along next to Tegan from BlueHeart to talk to us a bit more about engagement with the younger years.
Right, thank you. We've got this.
Yep, can see it.
Wonderful. So as Toby said, my name's Tegan and I work for the BlueHeart project, and today I have the pleasure of talking to you about our Suds for Schools project, which is one of the 6 work streams that makes up BlueHeart. Suds for Schools is a project which is aimed at beginning the conversation around resilience, climate resilience and flood resilience with school-aged children, primarily years 5 and 6, but we have worked with as young as year 2 and as old as year 8. So the age range is more to do with the age 7 to 13. So a little bit about our Suds for Schools program, or Sustainable Drainage Systems for Schools. It has 3 main aims, first of which is to help tackle flood risk in our local area. So our project's based in Eastbourne and Southern Wealden, and has a goal of helping to capture surface water and hold this back to help reduce surface water flood risk. We have 2 other aims, the first of which is to help facilitate a unique experience that helps raise awareness of climate change, and the second of which feeds in is the hope that behavioural change will spread out from our program into the wider school community. The project was a £600,000 project. It ran for 2 years and ended in March of last year, with 9 schools participating. And it was grant funded by the Department for Education, by the DEFRA and EA Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Programme, through an EA pot, and as well as our local water company, which is Southern Water. So a little bit about what our project was able to achieve. In the 2 years, we had 100 sustainable drainage systems installed. I have a picture here showing 2 of our Suds planters put together. So 100 of this style planter plus other Suds were installed throughout our 9 schools. And these came together to hold back about 45,000 litres of water, which is no mean feat, and is a definition of a small reservoir in England. So quite a lot of water that we've managed to capture. As well as focusing on flood risk, our Suds planters have allowed us to put over 900 new plants in across our 9 schools. And we've also had the pleasure of engaging with over 2,050 students in workshops, which I will go into a little bit more detail about now. So one of the main approaches we took to starting to begin the discussion about resilience for climate change and flood risk was to use education workshops. These took place before we did any installations in the schools, and were made up of 2 parts. The first of which was an outdoor workshop where children got the chance to play with water without having a particular focus or topic, just more general understanding of water, doing things such as, like in the picture, where clay dams were used to help do a task about slowing the flow of water and protecting downstream properties, as well as things like looking at permeable surfaces and tipping water onto varying surfaces to see which one absorbs water better, through to activities such as playing with gutter pipes and learning about drainage systems through that. The second part of the program was what we call a co-design workshop, where students then took their learnings from the morning or the day before and came together to sort of consolidate this learning with a quick PowerPoint, and then went into designing what they wanted to see in their schools. So like in the second picture, there was a beautiful A3 sheet where students were able to draw what they wanted, but also to point out sort of the most important thing to them that they wanted to see in their school. And I have a quote there from our engagement lead who helped run all these workshops. And I think it just sort of emphasizes how this process was really key to getting students to feel involved in ownership with the Suds project, and really brought them in from the start, to allow them to take pride in it as well, which I'll get into a little bit more with the next slide. A second choice that we made following these co-design workshops was to integrate recognisable design elements into the actual drainage installations in the school. So as I said, touching on pride, for the students to be able to see their ideas come to life, we really hoped that this would facilitate that, but also the ownership, and act as a touch point for them to look at the drainage and remember the learnings that came when they designed it. So for this particular school, I have some examples of the drawings that were done on the left. Before we came in, the school was learning about the word cascading in their English classes. And you can see cascading features quite prominently in the design drawings, but also my project area is by the beach. So a lot of the elements in this school and other schools were the beach, the ocean, and boats, which you can see coming through again. So we were able to bring these ideas through to our designs and not only have a visual representation of the cascading pipes that do work, the down pipes bring water out down, but to make this interactive so that the students were able to play with the boats as water comes down the pipes and into the suds planters. A third choice we made as part of the program was to really consciously integrate the drainage systems into the school life and the school routine. This involved a lot of engagement with teachers and the wider school community to understand how they use their space and where we can come into this. So the example on the left with the blue and the yellow planters, this area is a breakout space where children, if they wanted a break from class, would come out beforehand and stand in a concrete patio. So the school were very keen to have a space with a bench seat so that students had somewhere to sit down, but also the school colours of blue and yellow to be brought in so children could still feel like they were included in the school whilst they were taking a break from the classroom. So that was something we were able to achieve through the planters, and now the space is really integrated into the school's life and routine. And same with the second planter with the rainbow. This particular school, this is the pick up and drop off point for all students coming into the school. So again, by making the choice to put bench seating in and make the drainage interactive, now there's a place for students to leave their bikes and their scooters, use the benches to change their shoes or get rid of their high-vis vests, and also wait for their parents to come pick them up once school is finished. So again, this planter has become part of the school routine, and integrating multiple use into the drainage system has allowed it to become a spot for all to enjoy. And building on the initial workshops, some of the schools also had what we call maintenance workshops. So following the planters going in, we did a series of propagation sessions where we were able to help the teachers find ways that they could use clippings from the planters in science lessons. So this was more aimed at the older children and giving them a way to interact with the planters in an ongoing fashion, but also for us to get some learnings in about how best to maintain the planters going forward. So a bit of a win-win there for both of us. So in terms of the success of the program, it's a really hard question to answer, because when you're talking about building resilience with communities, I personally think this is something that we will only know in the years to come. But I've put some quotes on the screen from schools that we've worked with that I think show a really initial positive feedback of the program. So for example, the top left is about the rainbow planter and all the lovely comments from visitors and guests to the school, sort of hopefully showing that knowledge dissemination and sharing is happening just by creating these drainage systems that go beyond a typical drainage system, and facilitating conversation in that way. And I also particularly like the quote here from one student that we went back to about 9 months after we did the initial workshops in the school. And he was able to tell us, one, what the acronym for SUDS stood for, which was great in itself. But he took a trip to India with his family and saw widespread flooding, and was able to recall the learnings from our SUDS program and talk about it with his family. So again, that natural sort of discussion and knowledge sharing was happening, which is really, really positive from our program. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you very much. There's, again, absolutely loads going on in this project. It's just so fantastic to see such kind of beautiful outputs being created in such a central place in children's lives. These are both prime examples of life stage engagement where we are engaging and connecting with younger years, sharing knowledge and awareness with them, and they're able to then, as we've said there, take it home, share it with others, and be raising that awareness across the generations. and also empowering them to feel confident they know what flooding is, why it happens, and then hopefully put them in a position where, as we kind of go later into life, they're more confident understanding what the reason is behind flood risk and then how to adapt to it, which brings us very nicely onto Chris from FAIR. Over to you.
Thanks, Toby, and yeah, thank you for having me on the webinar today, and thanks for 2 great presentations, some amazing work being done there. So yeah, so my name's Chris. I'm a flood risk officer at Staffordshire County Council, which operates a lead local flood authority function for Staffordshire, but also the Black Country authorities. So yeah, our project covers Staffordshire, but also those authorities as well. So I'm kind of going to take a little bit of a different tack, and my project my presentation is a little bit more about our entire project, really, of how we're trying to get through this FAIR acronym, which is sort of flooding and aware, informed, resilience. The idea is that, you know, to be resilient, you need to be informed, and to be informed, you need to be aware. And so that's kind of where we've tried to approach the project of how do we get people onto that continuum, really. So yeah, just a few of our project partners. This is kind of the authorities, but we're also working with JB Consulting and a charity called National Flood Forum, who have been really key in terms of the engagement side, which I'll come on to later. So the kind of way that we set up the project was in a sort of 2-pronged approach, really. So we've kind of got the upper bit, which is a whole area approach, followed running alongside a kind of targeted approach for the most at-risk communities that we could sort of fit into our program. So yeah, looking at that kind of wider county approach. One work stream has been to provide a sort of one-stop shop website for flood information. Another is an improved comms infrastructure for flood advice and reporting. The third was to develop a forecasting system for surface water or stormwater and smaller water courses, and also to look at some machine learning for trash screen monitoring. So that's kind of infrastructure monitoring. And yeah, moving on to the sort of targeted approach, that has been to try and identify sort of vulnerable communities to do with flood risk, but also looking at other metrics. So there was a bit of work done on a sort of vulnerability risk assessment based on, you know, surface water flood risk, but also bringing in other aspects of vulnerability. So yeah, sort of age demographics, income, that kind of thing. Following that, there's a sort of program of community engagement and funding for sort of small scale interventions for at-risk communities. So yeah, I'll discuss that in a bit later. And yeah, following on from that, community flood action plans to essentially leave a legacy from that work. All this kind of feeds into some of the other work streams, which look at trying to bring all that learning together. So we've got some PhD work looking at developing a flood resilience measurement framework on a community scale, effectiveness of flood engagement work, and also looking at the innovation of our project as well. So yeah, looking at these wider county approaches, this flood information website, the initial stage was to kind of provide an area for people to go to access flood information. So, you know, from a basic thing of like, what is a flood and the different types of flooding. So we developed infographics around that. But yeah, trying to get them on this continuum. So, you know, are they aware of what flooding is, what risk they've got in their area, and then also looking at how can they be more informed, how can they sign up for flood warnings, that kind of thing, and then hopefully building them through to this resilient stage of, you know, what actions can they take, what could they do to prepare and also recover better. So yeah, I said that phase one was more about the flood information side. What we're looking, it's currently going online at the moment, is a kind of community hub area. So each of the communities we're working in, they'll have this community hub where they'll be able to bring together all the kind of work packages we've got going on and present it in a kind of useful way for people. So for example, if they've got key infrastructure in their area, such as a debris screen, they'll be able to see camera feeds. If they've got local flood forecasts that we have developed, they'll be sort of displayed on here, and any kind of community plans will be hosted on there as well. So it's kind of more like a useful tool for people, really. So these are some examples. Yeah, we've got like kind of useful map function to see, yeah, what gauges they've got in their area, and other information on there as well. The next sort of thing we've been looking at is sort of improving a service for advice and guidance and reporting of flood events across the area. So we've kind of been working with Hello Lamppost on this. I know they've worked on some other projects in the program as well. But essentially, this is in two stages. So one is kind of a virtual flood warden. The Environment Agency kind of developed a large knowledge base for this AI tool. So this is, there's a lot of information that's really useful, and we've just been kind of making that a little bit more suitable for our area. But that's essentially to take a bit of it's to reduce resource on kind of our internal call centers or on our staff, if people, especially in times of flood, if people can access advice quickly, then that's really useful. But something we're also developing at the moment is a triage tool to essentially allow people to report flooding in much more easily. I think at the moment it's very fragmented between different authorities in the UK. Between local authorities, the Environment Agency, highways departments, and other people are responsible for flooding. So having a tool that they can, do it all in one place, that's kind of what we're trying to do. So that's hopefully launched in the next few months. The other side, which has kind of been a big innovation for the project, is development of a local surface water forecasting tool. So this uses ensemble rainfall forecasts and essentially puts out the output from the tool is a kind of probability of rainfall in a certain area, and then by nature of that, the probability of surface water flooding. So currently in the UK, you can have flood warnings from the Environment Agency. That's all to do with sort of main river flooding. So yeah, we've tried to get to a point where we've got a bit more detailed forecasts for people who aren't potentially affected by main river flooding, but are by surface water and smaller water courses. So yeah, the nature of this is it's obviously a lot more difficult to predict, but yeah, there's a certain, so we tried to keep the messaging a little bit more a little bit looser and not really related too much towards those Environment Agency warnings. It's more of like a information stream for them. We've also that kind of final bit we're looking at for the whole area was this research into blockage detection. So the University of Reading and Exeter have developed essentially an algorithm that can give you like a blockage percentage on a debris screen. So this is really useful, particularly in urban areas, but it doesn't have to be. But quite in our sort of project area, there's quite a lot of flooding caused by blockages on these kind of structures. So we've had really good results from that, and it's now integrated into our system. So now, we can see an incoming forecast, and then we can also get notifications from this to say a screen is a certain percent blocked. We can set those thresholds, and I think that'll be really useful going forward for if you're looking at large scale areas where you've got hundreds of these screens and things. It allows you to prioritize resources in that way. And coming on to kind of more the targeted approach at at-risk communities, this kind of a little bit more relevant to what we're talking about in terms of the flood engagement. The way we've kind of set this up was to, have, I discussed previously about a sort of vulnerability assessment. So the idea of that was to basically give us a list. So we've got 20 areas in the project, and those have kind of been selected through flood risk, but we've tried to get a bit of a broad approach of looking at the climate just data to try and get a bit of a broader mix of areas. For example, rural and urban areas where you might have an older population or younger, English as a second language, using that kind of thing. I mean, we still need to do a little bit of work to see how well we've done with that, but definitely at the start that was kind of part of our key thinking. So within that, we've kind of got this 4-stage approach. Really, it's kind of the first kind of thing would be to look at targeted engagement. So as I mentioned, we've been working with the National Flood Forum. So they are a charity based in the UK who essentially provide support to flooded residents. So their kind of model is to speak to flooded residents and set up flood action groups. So that's kind of been some of the areas we've got groups, and in other areas we've got our own community staff who've gone in and tried to go kind of what Toby was talking about before, go to essentially areas where people already are. So parish council meetings, village fairs, that kind of stuff. I really tried to get information together, get people organised, and start to kind of collate information over a long period of time. I think what we found is, in a lot of areas that have had problems for a number of years, they've been kind of passed around all these different authorities and not got a straight answer from people, and that's kind of the first step to getting the right information following that, you've kind of got that development of options. So the idea behind the project was to do as a co-design thing with people. So what are the issues? What are the potential interventions? You know, some of the stuff we're looking at is, as Toby mentioned, looking more at sustainable drainage, natural flood management, but it could also be, you know, if there's key things that other authorities should have done, for example, highways authorities or water authorities, trying to bring people around a table in a multi-agency way. And yeah, kind of moving through this design implementation stage, and then following that, just bringing all that information together into what is essentially like a response, similar to sort of an emergency response plan, but it's more to do with, yeah, key information and who to contact, and yeah. So I'll just kind of run through, yeah, some of the schemes. I'm not sure I'm doing for time, Toby, you're giving me the eyes, but some of the stuff we've been doing. So one of them was a suds rain garden around a community library, which has suffered from flooding for a number of years. And we used a product called Hydro Rock, which is like essentially a natural aquifer. It's like a basalt wall blocks, and they're really useful. You can work around services, and as long as they're all connected, they work in a way of absorbing and putting water into the ground. We've also done work with communities where, you know, there's potential for looking at reassessing what their watercourse does. If there's this area in Brood, which is in South Staffordshire, they've had issues with the kind of overflow channel, which was operating as a main channel. So there's kind of where reconfigurations works and bank stabilizations. Another hydro rock drain here in sort of grounds of a high school to capture runoff to stop it kind of heading over the road. And they've also had like a new screen and a CCTV camera, so that enables them, the community, to monitor that and sort of give them a bit of peace of mind about when there isn't blockages. We've done some natural flood management up in Endon, which is sort of north of the county, and we've kind of gone more into like a monitoring approach to test an approach of slowing one of the tributaries down, and we've also looked at some PFR in there as well. So I think a lot of these schemes have been kind of holistic in terms of trying to come at them from a number of different angles. This one in Church Eaton is, you know, it's a bit of more of a rural area with an aging population who quite often get cut off through highway flooding. So we've kind of been working with our highways colleagues and looking at sort of managing the water courses with landowners and putting in natural flood management measures, but also, you know, working with highways to just bring everything in a more holistic sense. I think a lot of the risk management authorities often work in these silos, and it's kind of, I think, a key success of the project has been bringing them all together into the same room. Yeah, just some of the schemes we've got going on this final year of the project. So we've also been looking at these suds pods, which I can't remember which one it was you heard, the other projects had these, but they've been really good at just engaging residents individually. We're looking at a automatic screen in one of our areas. This is due to the kind of flood group there having to get in and clear debris quite often because it's a very flashy catchment. And yeah, some of the highway stuff we've been doing. So one of the areas in Edingale and Lichfield suffers really bad highway flooding very, very often. And there's not really much we could have done as a project, but one of the things that came out of some of the community meetings we had there was would there be a potential to have sort of flood warning signs that are linked to level sensors in the highway. So just getting into the final stages of getting those installed soon. So that's hopefully something that could be shared more widely. And yeah, this kind of final bit was bringing together some of those learning benefits. So I think that's going to be some of the key sort of research outputs of the project. So this development of a community scale flood resilience framework. You know, how do we measure how resilient a certain community is? There's been a lot of work done on setting up a kind of really practical framework for that, based on sort of really short questionnaires. Also looking at the different types of engagement we've done in the communities, and you know, what are the key behavioural elements of that, and also a bit of work looking at the innovation of the project as well. Yeah, just looking at some of the challenges. I think the timescales for engagement, especially with, I think we found, yeah, what you were talking about before, Toby, of those areas in that kind of middle stage of life where you've got very busy people, we found that sometimes is really difficult to get any traction. It takes a long time, or a few different types of approaches to try and get people involved. And quite often we found that you might have to do it on a bit more of an individual level with certain residents. Some people might not be too keen to come to sort of group meetings and things, so there's a fair bit of resource required to do that. We found like there's sometimes a bit of apathy and frustration where there's been gaps between that initial engagement and then, as we know, any kind of construction timeline is usually quite long and difficult. So yeah, that's kind of some of our key challenges there. And yeah, a bit of a forward look, it was just continue with that program into the final year, that integration and trying to push that more widely, really. Just I think at the moment we've just been focused on getting it working, and now we'll see can we get people to interact with it, really. So yeah, I think that's probably it from me. Might have gone a bit over time there, Toby, but apologies.
That's quite all right. Thank you very much. And that kind of really shines a light on the reality and the complexity of flood risk and how flood risk is managed. That it's not a simple thing. So we're kind of starting off the kind of journey today talking about the water cycle and trying to engage and connect young people with that and kind of build that story up as you go into schools and kind of bring in the kind of concept of flood risk and be communicating that in a kind of safe environment, leading towards what Chris was talking about there, which is really complex engagement where you're trying to engage through demonstrating flood risk benefit and bringing in that co-design and linking in with those midlife stage people, kind of bringing that flood risk benefit to them in their homes, as well as then working with those who have got the capacity and the space to connect and engage on it. We've got a few questions coming in on the chat already in the Q&A function, so please do be adding those as well. A couple of questions I could just pose to you guys before we do go into those. I'll first come to Chris since you're already warmed up. In terms of that kind of co-design, what did that look like?
I think, like you said, it's so complicated, and it seems like and what we'll be producing at the end of the project in the next few months is these case studies to do with each area. So I think within that we'll be able to pull out the key demographics and how we engage in that area and how we got through those stages. But I think we found like certain areas are really open to that kind of classic optioneering thing of like kind of what you're doing with the kids is what are the issues, what would you like to see, and putting some stuff, sketches. But I think a lot of the time we found that approach has been not gone down so well at the start. I think some of them have been frustrated for a long time, and I think they've kind of come at it more of like, it's your responsibility what you're going to do. We've been telling certain people about this for years, like this is the thing we know will work. And so there's been an element of taking that on board, but also trying to myth bust some of it. So that area I was talking about there in Endon, you see a real mix of people at that group, and tends to be kind of retired age, but there's a lot of landowners who come there. Really, we're trying to get an NFM scheme off the ground there, and there's just a lot of misinformation flying around. So I think we found like the kind of good way to do it is to do, have a good idea, good knowledge of what the area's like, what potentially the problems are, using historical data or anything we've got, and going in there with some key ideas, and at least you've got a start point there of this is what we think might work, these are the kind of things we could, and that seems to be a lot more productive in terms of getting them involved in any kind of design conversations and things. But I would say generally, yeah, once we've got that, you do get people who are really knowledgeable about their local area and yeah, have good thoughts about what they want. But yeah, that's really what I'd say on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the engagement is one where we're not starting on a blank canvas as much as we'd like to sometimes. And engagement early on in life is very much focused on trying to get people on the same page and getting a clear shared understanding of what the risk and resolutions are. As you're going later into life stages, you are dealing with an increasingly complex background. The people's relationship with their land, with flooding, it becomes much more complicated, it becomes much more personal. So when you're engaging, it's then, as we're kind of saying, there's that co-design, a meeting in the middle, coming to them with ideas, but also equally it's going, listening and hearing what they need first, which, yeah, I think, Chris, you're just trying to deal with by the sounds of it every single day at the moment. So, yeah, lovely. We've got a few questions coming in through the Q&A function now. First one's actually from Andrew. Andrew, do you want to cover your question off?
Sorry, Toby, just to make sure that that's to me. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, apologies, because I see an Andy Wall in the Q&A chat as well with a question. I'd actually really like to encourage those folk who would maybe like to kind of verbalize your own question or come on camera off microphone to raise your hands. And I can then enable both your camera and your microphone. But I guess encourage Chris, Sharon, Tegan, Toby, etc. to look at the Q&A, the questions that are already there. And just as people are verbalizing their own questions, there's obviously some that are directed at you individually. You could maybe write a quick comment on. And then obviously in the chat as well, if you could please look over that. Yeah, it was really fantastic presentation. So as people begin to raise their hand, I'll just mention one of the ones in the chat, which is actually to Sharon. And just because you're obviously the first presenter, just going back in time, so this was actually from Kelly McLaughlin, just writing about the great activities that obviously you presented and just asking whether those were self-led or what kind of adult, say, involvement was it, ranger, adult, teacher, in terms of accompanying children. And also interested in some of the take-home messages for the children that we're visiting.
Yeah, great. Really good question, Kelly. Thank you. Yeah, so I would say that at the beginning of the project, before we'd actually put those two interactive tools in, so we're talking about the Palm and the sandbox, that we had originally thought that children could do that themselves. But we decided actually that it also so happened that the farm decided that they would get a STEM ambassador on board. So actually we're developing a whole host of resources around that. And the idea is that children will then come in school. So one of the things that we've agreed with Sandown Farm is that all of the children, the schools within the PICS catchment, get to come to Sandown Farm for free once a year. And we're developing a whole lesson around that, depending on the ages, of course. So there will be an adult who's there, who's with a teaching background, to teach some of the important lessons that we want to get out of both those tools. I mean, the sandbox is something that you just you can just play with it and still have fun with it, but it's really good to do a little bit more explaining about it and how it works and why it's important. And then in terms of the take-home messages for the younger children, Oscar the Otter has a map. I didn't have a picture of that, sorry, didn't include it in the presentation, but within that there's some messages in there, but done in a fun way. So there's an Oscar, then there's a find the different characters that we have. There's some join the dots, but there's also some questions that they can talk through with their mum and dad. So there's some little messages in there, and they get a sticker and they get a little prize when they finish the trail. And then for the older children who will come on those school visits, there will be take-homes and messages through that learning as well. And we haven't quite decided what they look like yet, but there'll definitely be some learning and working with the schools and the teachers to make sure that they fit in with the curriculum. Hope that's answered your question.
That's wonderful, Sharon. Thank you very much. Toby, would you like to come in at this point, and then we can obviously revert back to the Q&A questions?
Yeah, absolutely. We are getting quite a few coming in through the chat, the Q&A function, and the general chat as well. So I'm going to take some of those off. As Andrew said there, if you're happy to ask your question out loud, please do just raise your hand and then we can have those asked directly. If not, I'll be starting just from the bottom. Emma, we'll come to you.
So Emma, I will just, I have allowed your mic and I will by your camera, so you should be able to control your own settings now.
Thank you. I think my voice can come through, and this is me. Thank you so much. Thank you for the really interesting presentations. I think they all sound really exciting. My question is about the long-term funding to enable sort of long-term legacy of the projects. And if the projects are designed to show how to engage across the different life stages, they're fantastic, they're doing a great job. But there's always costs to continue running projects. And some of these they're generating the intangible benefits of, you know, lifelong learning in children. Who's willing to pay for that? Schools have no money. I gave an example in my question where I said, you know, the kids' art teacher at their school said he's got £3,000 to pay for art supplies for 1,800 students every year. So it's less than £1 per student. And that would all go on just fixing a bench if it was broken. So I'm aware that there is no money in the state system. You know, you can always find it, but I doubt it'll be made available for these brilliant projects. So how do you deliver the sustainability of these projects? Or are they simply exemplars that other people can then copy and think, well, actually that worked well? Or are you looking for things like public-private partnerships, whereby even if it's greenwashing, companies might be willing to participate or engage in these things to support themselves? So it's a very broad question about the long-term sustainable funding of the initiatives.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, absolutely recognise that funding is such a big problem, especially in some of the spaces that we're talking about with community groups, with schools. So yeah, it's a really good one to raise. I'm going to quickly talk on that before coming to Tegan to talk about studs for schools, and Sharon to talk about partnerships with charities and private organisations. In terms of the model, the kind of these Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Programme projects have been exploring is 6-year programme. At the end of it, funding stops. The aspiration behind it, though, is that with these learnings, efficiencies are gathered and kind of gained, so that when someone's trying to replicate it, there are guides, there are blueprints, and there are processes and kind of templates in place that means that these things can be replicated at a much smaller fraction of the total cost, because the kind of thinking and that kind of process of how do you get there has been gone through and written down, mean that hopefully next time the pain of it, some of the pain at least, can be kind of taken away. So I know for ResilienTogether, we're working on a smart catchment blueprint, which basically gives you all the kind of steps of how to install a hydrological or hydrometric and water quality monitoring network. A bunch of the cost came from us not knowing what we're doing. Now we have a councillor who knows what they're doing and they've written it down and they can share it with others. So hopefully things like that can really benefit that kind of accelerated and more efficient sharing of learning. Tegan, can I come to you about studs for schools and any other funding that you're aware of?
Yes, of course. Yeah, great question. And just want to put out there that it's something that's been in the forefront of our minds throughout this whole program. We've been really conscious in our decisions with picking planters that have 15-year guarantees and 20-year lifespans, and also making the conscious decision to fund the initial year of maintenance. So if anything, it does go wrong in that first sort of period, we can capture it and it's covered and budgeted for. But as you say, the issue is after that period. But I think we're in a really interesting space with funding at the moment, and particularly the Department for Education. And there is a lot of SUDS for schools funding coming out. My project personally, we've applied for a second round of funding and been successful and are trying the program again. So there is more funding coming out, and we have been told that there's no reason that you can't revisit a school in the future, sort of thing. So it is something we're aware of. It is something we've tried our best to mitigate the risks of, and hopefully in the future, if need be, we can go back and revisit.
Thank you. And Sharon, in terms of that relationship that you have with Standalone Farm, how's that working? What's the legacy of it looking like?
Yeah, really great question, and yeah, just like Tegan said, legacy has always been at the forefront of what it is that we're trying to implement and to show in terms of our projects. I mean, one of the great things about working with Letchworth Heritage Foundation and Stand Down Farm is that they already had a vision for learning at the farm, and this is something that will continue way beyond the lifetime of the Resilient Together project. So we find kind of fishing into their vision. But we have more recently, just actually in the last few weeks, we had a legacy meeting where we brought lots of different project partners together to talk about what we can do going forward post the end of this project. So we brought some of the project partners in, and as you said, they're the private partners and public enterprises, and we will be working together on a legacy plan about how we can make sure that some of the great work that we put in there can continue going forward.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, and it's testament to what good collaboration can look like, that this is meeting the needs of this project, but it's meeting the needs of this charity, of this kids farm in the middle of a city, and that's going to last for years beyond this because it meets the needs. So I appreciate there isn't budget for finding such people, but where you can find those relationships, there is a real keenness from private sector, charity sector as well, to collaborate in the water industry space. We'll come to Councillor Derbyshire next.
Hi, I'm Judith. I've got one of the best wards in the country, and it's Greystoke, Hullswater and Dacre. So we suffered Storm Desmond, 2015, I think it was. And so there's a lot of knowledge in the community generally to do with flooding and other issues. Tends to rain a lot here. In fact, the flood warning's just gone off yesterday for today because we had some torrential rain. But I've got an issue in my ward where I've got an estate, a lot of it older people, bungalows. They've had flooding into the foundations, flooding into the garages, but not into the houses yet. There is an issue to do with the drain, which the council is trying to get solved. But even then, that's not going to solve the problems. The area is dark blue on the Environment Agency maps. I'm trying to get the community to look at encouraging residents to put on door blocks, look at the air vent blockage and things like that. We are lucky in Cumbria. We do have a Trailblazer programme for Local Resilience Forum, and so I'm working with people on that. But it's how to persuade older people to look at this when they're still wanting sandbags to be delivered, which, sorry, we're not going to do any longer. And they need to be looking at, as I say, better defences for their own property. A lot of them can afford it. I've got areas elsewhere in Westmorland and Furness where we've got issues with terraced houses and a lot of people in poverty, where we've got issues that they need to have defences as well. But it's how you encourage, especially older people, to get involved with this, to understand it better, and rather than turning around and saying, well, what's the council going to do to stop this? Any advice welcomed?
It's a great question, a very big question. So for those not kind of aware of the kind of use of property for resilience is the use of barriers, often made of metal or plastic, use of kind of air brick that allow air through but not water, among many other measures, pumps that can be used at the property level to help manage flood risk at that level. Chris, you mentioned that you had a PFR on your project. Is there something that you've encountered in terms of trying to engage with those not seeking such solutions?
Yeah, I'd say from the point of view of our project, I think these flood action groups that we've set up have been a really good forum for that kind of stuff, where people can come with issues, and by working with that National Flood Forum, you kind of have like a bit of a moderator, and because it's all kind of like written down on a clear plan that they can read. There's if there are kind of for example, that question about sandbags, if there's just trying to myth bust that a little bit, then if we find that that's a kind of key, there's an issue that's a key thing in that area, for example, in that Endon area, is more about what NFM does, or like riparian. We did a riparian workshop, like who's responsible for what, and I think that's really unclear. I think about who's responsible for a main river, what even is a main river, who's responsible for that land, and like we found landowners who have come and just not even been aware that they were meant to be doing certain things. So yeah, I think having that group forum allows you to come in as an authority and kind of work in a really structured way. So yeah, on an individual level, I suppose it's one of those where it's like quite a sort of resource intensive. I think if there's an individual property, a resident you want to try and bring round, and I think we found through this project there's a real benefit to those kind of soft skills, that soft but real like steady contact approach. And I think that's going back to that kind of legacy thing. As a county, we've kind of one key thing we're trying to do is change that model that we've got at the moment of, for a flood scheme, what would normally happen is there's a storm, there's some flooding in our houses, and then there's a Section 19 report for that flood. If there's a certain number of houses that meet the threshold, we go through that whole process. And what would normally happen is there's an engineering team within staffs or the flood officers, and they'll kind of go through this whole process through the EA funding scheme, and it might go, 7-8 years down the line, you kind of come to that community with a scheme. I think what we try to do, and they've kind of committed to this with the full-time employees of a community engagement team, is really having a bit of resource to be able to do that work early and have a steady contact with people. That then they know kind of who to go to. But I do recognise that's a very like resource intensive thing that you might not be able to do for there's only one. Say we've got one community officer, there's only a certain number of residents they could be in regular contact with, and you don't want to start giving numbers out and them to be overwhelmed. So yeah, it's kind of got to have a bit of a. You can't.
I think we're lucky in Cumbria that we've got an officer who's now working on it. I think he's been actually invited to talk to Patterdale WI. I think it's one way of going in is using existing groups to get them to hear his views. We're also working in partnership with Cumbria CVS. Caroline Otley, I think, has been in one of your talks recently, and also with Action with Communities in Cumbria. So it's a partner approach, but it is more how to get, especially to the older residents who just assume that somebody else will come along and solve the problem. I'm being very critical here, and being ageist, I am an OAP myself, but it is that thing of and just wondered whether anybody has techniques. I see somebody's put in about the Cotswold Flood Warden scheme. We actually have some really good groups like Appleby Emergency Response Group and people like that. So I need to bring more people together, I think, in my ward to be able to look at the issue. But yeah, if anybody's got any ideas, I would welcome them, please.
Thank you very much. We'll come on to Mark next. Mark Seart.
I just wonder, sorry, Mark, before, but Tegan, I saw your hand raised. Is that relation to the point that has just been raised? I wonder.
It was. I was just going to add too, it's kind of been touched on in the BlueHeart project. We've had a little bit of success with that approach, as you said, of going to existing community groups and just highlighting a key contact person. So maybe people don't want to engage with us at the moment, but it's there when you need it, sort of thing, and meeting people in their existing groups rather than asking them to come to us. And then if or when they decide they want to contact us, there is a community group that is aware of a contact and then can go through that route. So quite similar to what you mentioned, Judith.
Thank you. We'll come to you, Mark, now.
Thank you. So just picking up on Emma's original question and tying it in with Tegan's kind of approach, what we've done with the Surrey Resilient Schools project is effectively through a base carbon audit. It's wider than just SUDS, but we've been identifying the savings, and where particularly we've got rainwater harvesting, 80% of the schools toilet flushes, it is ordinary potable water. So the approach we've taken is all of the adaptation elements we put in, the savings that we've identified as part of the business case, we've asked to be ring fenced for that forward maintenance, because it's every local authority, every government body puts capital in and then doesn't maintain it, lets it smash to bits and then put it in for another bid and replace it. So with the thinking, if you are saving X carbon, you are saving X money. If you are saving X water, X heat, turning the temperature down, all the kind of things we all know about. If you can identify that saving as part of the business case and say, we can put in further adaptation measures or maintain what we're putting in, whichever thought process you want to follow, you then kind of solve that problem. And the DFE, and particularly it was Thames Water, but the AMP8 kind of funding, we had an entire playground, an entire building going straight into the sewer, so 56 litres a second straight into the fouls. There was all manner of chaos that was causing down into rivers. So by getting that bit funded externally and then using that saving and ring fencing it, we can then start to have a sustainable program where it pays for itself. And you need that kind of kickstarter from a grant funding to get it going. But if you've got that as part of a BlueHeart or Thames or postcode lottery or whatever money you can come up with to start it, it then starts to roll on the snowball. If that critical part is then keeping the saving, if you don't, it's lost and it just stops at that point at which the project kind of is done. So it's worth mentioning because it's a different thought process to the way everything normally functions.
That's a very helpful insight there. Thank you. Actually makes me think as well. If you have any things in your mind around funding pathways like Ofwat Innovation Fund or whatever else that you have used in the past for projects that you're aware of, it could be really useful just to kind of post those in the chat so people have a small log of places they could then go and do their own research on and explore those kind of pathways. Collaboration between water companies, collaboration with grants fund pathways, research institutes are all valid and have been used pathways, so really worth exploring those. So if you know of any, be that such for schools or whatever, please do post them in the chat, and then that's something that is then a resource for all of us to then explore a little bit more as well. Thank you. Any other questions from our audience?
And just as people are thinking, Toby, yeah, thank you to everyone that has been obviously putting various links and comments in the chat function, especially in relation to other comments made by attendees. I see, Alison, you're mentioning in terms of fire and rescue services and the cross-selling of messages, so that kind of multi-agency collaboration. At NCSR conference in 2024, we had a really interesting presentation from one of the fire officers in Sussex, which was about their collaboration with GP practices, and that was obviously about being able to deliver those public messages to those that need it most, and perhaps thinking slightly differently, and making sure that data sharing arrangements were in place to enable that kind of multi-agency collaboration around those that might be considered more vulnerable within society. So it was really fantastic to reach different sections of society that perhaps are sometimes not reached. So, and thanks also to Chris, I see, responding to a number of the questions within the Q&A. We have just over 10 minutes or so. So if anyone would like to raise their hand, please do so. This will be your kind of last opportunity with the panel. Toby, I wonder if any of your questions that we talked about before, whether there was any others on your list that we talked about before the webinar itself that you might want to pose, just as we wait on any further hands.
I guess one of the big questions around schemes like these is it's really based on partnership working, and if you see on each of the sets of slides, there are, I don't know, 10 different sets of organisations working together on these kind of projects. That obviously takes the many millions of pounds of backing to fund and make happen. But I'm just interested to hear like how you go about not just building but also maintaining that partnership working. I don't know if Sharon, for example, in terms of like how you work together with the many partners that you work with.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a really big part, I think, of all of the FCRIP programs. Partnership working is the whole reason we've been able to develop most of these projects across England. So ResilienTogether work with a huge amount of partners, including JBA, but the EA, water companies. So we work with Anglian and Affinity, and with local, local groups. So we work with Friends of Norton Common, and with Sandiloe Farm, of course, as well as University of Exeter. And one of the ways that we do that is having really clear objectives and a joint vision right at the beginning of the project. But it's also about building up relationships and working together on things. And it does really help with sharing knowledge, getting experts' advice in. Considering the whole broad spectrum of things that we're doing across these projects, that there's a whole load of different experts that you need to bring in, and being able to work together has really helped us deliver this project. And I think it is just about that building up, being transparent about what it is that you're trying to achieve, having a shared vision, and then just working together towards that with regular check-ins, which is what Toby and I do weekly, but we also make sure that there's lots of communications through e-bulletins that we share out to our project partners, and an opportunity to meet 4 times a year face-to-face, and show some of those partners that maybe mightn't be on every single call all of the great work that we've done. So we've had lots of meetings at Standown Farm, but we're just about we're in the process of doing some SUDS installation, and we'll be bringing projects along, partners along to that, and just celebrating the successes that we have as well. And I think that's what it's about for me anyway.
Thank you, and I'd really echo that. And I think that having the shared objectives at the beginning and capitalizing on the motivations behind each of the organizations that you work with is really important. Like for my organization, JBA, the aspiration is to lead in the pursuit of climate resilience, and that's a very big general thing, but actually that's precisely what Sharon's project is doing. So actually my lot love when we do work with them, because it's pushing the same objectives and goals for the longer term that we have as well. So doing that, collaborating, working out what the people's motivations are and collaborating with them to achieve them alongside your goals, it's a humongous benefit and really kind of brings together the best of all your organizations.
So I guess as we approach the 2:30 mark, last opportunity for anyone to raise their hands to ask a final question or a comment. Thank you for continuing to contribute to the chat. I think part of the great value of these webinars is that sort of cross-talk between the attendees, as well as obviously hearing and interacting with our presenters. So it's really fantastic that we can all try to help ourselves and work together, to deal with some of the knotty challenges that we all deal with. If there are no further hands being raised, I think it's really big thank yous basically at this point. So obviously a big thank you to Tegan, to Sharon, to Chris for presenting, but also to Toby then for obviously bringing you all together and coming up with the idea for the webinar, and to Toby obviously for presenting and moderating. A really big thank you also to all of you for attending. I think this is our 41st or 42nd webinar since the time of COVID. So it's really still fantastic that we're still getting towards 150 or so folk at each webinar, and obviously, as I mentioned at the beginning, the recordings will be available later on, and please feel free to share those with your network. I still haven't worked out how to share anything from the chat with those recordings. Unfortunately, I see Judith a comment in the chat, but the recording and obviously the various slides that people showed will be viewable via the recording. So I think we're in a position to give you back 5 minutes of your day. So I just want to thank you all for coming. We will obviously send out information around upcoming webinars when we have the various registration pages completed. So I look forward to seeing you whenever those may be. And yeah, please keep on engaging with the work of the INCSR and the NCSR, and please feel free to reach out to all of those folk that offered their contact details during the course of today. So if I could maybe have a chat then with all of our presenters as we finish, but I wish all of you a good day. So thank you very much.
And thank you, Andrew, as well, for arranging and making all this happen.
Thank you.